Thanks, you guys. That, oh man, I am really grateful thanks for that welcome. As Tom mentioned earlier, we hope that the presenters today are very good. I was like, oh, that's directed at me. I feel a little bit like kind of like singled out here because I don't know. I do. I do want to say though that I am just absolutely grateful to be able to be here with you. I've been praying about this day for a really, really long time, and just trying to be prepared. So I asked my brothers-in-law, because I love my brothers-in-law a lot. I love my brothers a lot as well. But my brothers-in-law have a higher bar for me than my brothers do. And so I was like, you guys, what would you, if you went to a men's conference, what would you want to hear? And they did not spare me. They were very much all about kind of like they knew what it was. So I've been praying about this and preparing for this. Hopefully, I just want to honor you all because I know that there are 1,000 places you could be on a Saturday other than this place right now. And so the fact that you've chosen to be here, even if like whatever I have to offer or whatever the rest of the conference has to offer isn't enough, it doesn't actually like equal out, doesn't kind of balance out the sacrifices you had to make to get here. I absolutely do trust in the Lord, and I know that every time we make a motion, every time we make a movement towards Him, it does not go unresponded to. It doesn't go unrewarded. That the Lord knows whatever it took for you to get here. Especially if on the way here it was one of those things like, well, stinking traffic and this parking's stupid, and like I had to get up so early or whatever the kind of my day that I got to maybe sleep in and you didn't get to do that, and all those kind of things that kind of eat at you a little bit, just kind of like I'm doing this for you, God. This better be worth it. I know that feeling, and just to recognize that, even if this doesn't seem to count for much, I know that the Lord receives your gift of your time, and He receives the gift of the sacrifice that you had to make. Speaking of 1,000 other places, I love whenever I start, like especially a men's thing, I love asking the question, a question I'm going to ask you all to turn to someone next to you and answer the following question, like, because you could be anywhere right now, but you're here at Antlers, here in Colorado Springs at this conference. Here's the question, and I invite you to turn to someone sitting next to you and answer this. If you could be anywhere in the world right now, doing anything in the world right now, where would you be? What would you be doing? Okay, so that's the question. So turn to someone sitting next to you and answer the following question. If you could be anywhere in the world right now, doing anything in the world right now, where would you be? What would you be doing? Ready, go. All right. Hopefully everyone had a chance to answer that question. So hopefully you had a chance to answer. You haven't had a chance to answer? Okay, keep going. Okay, anyone want to volunteer? Just kind of like, just raise your hand and I can call on you. And like, where would you be if you could be anywhere in the world right now?
Watching Alabama and LSU later.
Yeah. Okay, watching Alabama and LSU later on. I'm assuming those are football teams? Great. So watching Alabama and LSU. That's Louisiana and Alabama. We're in Denver. We're not in Denver. We're in Colorado, right? We have okay, we still have a vested interest. That's great. Wonderful answer. Anyone else? Yes. In nature, playing disc golf. Absolutely. Good answer. Great answer. Also, you guys have nature around here, which is pretty awesome. Yes? Watching Colorado College beating UMD. Do you mean the University of Minnesota Duluth? So I'm glad you said that because I forgot to mention. So the podcast that Tom mentioned is called, it's Bulldog Catholic. And some people are like, are you Bulldog Catholic because you're like bulldogs, like, you bite on, you don't let go, kind of like you have tenacity. Like, no, it's the mascot for the university. We're the Bulldogs, so we're Bulldog Catholic. So yeah, I'd love to see UMD beat that team. Where else? Anyone else over here? This area, general vicinity? Yeah. Aww, at home with his wife and his daughter. That's awesome. Great answer. Down here.
I would be in
Crested Butte mountain biking. Anyone else be out in the woods? Yeah, okay, that's why you live here. Anyone else? Yeah, all good answers. I just like, sorry. Yes. Yes, C. Would like just absorbing the sun on the coast. Yeah.
Right here with all you guys.
Nerd. Just kidding. That's a great answer. See, because here's the thing: this is one of those realities, and I love the fact that you said that, and I love that you're the last person. Because whenever I ask this question, whenever it's almost 95% of every person I ever ask this question to, the answer is always the same. I knew what your answer was going to be before you even said it, because 95% of the time, the answer is always, if you could be anywhere in the world right now, doing anything in the world right now, the answer is almost always somewhere else, doing something else. Like, think about how often that's our default, is if anyone asked you in the course of like the last week, you're at work, you're at home, you're doing whatever you need to be doing, and they ask you the question, if you could be anywhere in the world, doing anything in the world, what would you be doing? Where would you be? Almost always the answer is, I would be somewhere else doing something else, which is, on one hand, like kind of, like, yeah, we have dreams, and sometimes actually I should be somewhere else doing something else. But think about what that does to us, particularly what it does to us as Catholic men, if my default at any given point in my life is I would rather be somewhere else doing something else. What does that do to us? Because that impulse in us, that desire in us, it costs us something. It's not free. Because I'd be somewhere else. Yeah, but right here is where you're supposed to be. I'd be doing something else. Well, yeah, but right here is what God has called you to do. This thing is what God has called you to do. And if I spend the majority of my life wishing I could be somewhere else, wishing I could be doing something else, I'm actually letting the majority of my life pass by me. In fact, we know this, right? The only place you and I can find God, the only place He can find us, is right here and right now. The past is gone. The future has not yet happened. So the only place God can find us, the only place we can find God, is right here, right now, doing this thing in this place. And what happens if I'm constantly wanting to be somewhere else, doing something else? That means what I'm saying is, God, you can't find me here. And at the heart of that is a lack of, in some ways, it's a lack of faith. What I mean by that is, we believe as Catholics that God can use everything in our lives. Like, we have this conviction, right? We have this trust in Him that God can use everything, even the difficult moments, even the dreary moments, that He can actually use the moments we would rather not be doing what we're doing and be where we are. That God uses everything. This is like, it's just driven home to me, that reality that God uses everything. My bishop, a little while back, he told us the story of Blessed Stanley Rother. I don't know if you guys know Blessed Stanley Rother. So he's a Oklahoman, which is one of the states, and in this country, and it looks a lot like the eastern part of your state. And it's just you can see for miles. You can almost see heaven, which is here. But Blessed Stanley Rother, he had entered into the seminary back in not too long ago, I think in the 70s, maybe 60s. And he was one of the guys that they kind of kept asking him to take a break from the seminary, because his academics weren't like the best. And so they're like, Stanley, maybe just take a little break from the seminary, go back home. And you can imagine that he was asked to go back home, how frustrating he would be. Like, no, I need to be in formation. I want to be a priest. But he kept being asked to go back home, and he'd have work his family's farm when he went back home. And he could see that as time being wasted. Like, why am I being sent back home, back to the farm, when I want formation, when I want to be somewhere else, I want to be doing something else? God, this is not right. I should be getting ready to be a priest, not just back on the farm. Eventually, he was ordained, and he was sent to be a missionary in Guatemala. And when he was in Guatemala, he made this immense impact on the people of Guatemala, the people that he got to serve. And the impact was not because he had this academics that was monstrous. It wasn't because he had this incredible formation in the seminary, although he did. The impact was he took all of the skills that he learned when he was sent back home to work the farm to help the native people learn how to farm better, to take care of their families better, to build better communities. The exact things that he learned when he was taken off track are the things that God used in the future to impact the most people. See, with God, nothing is wasted unless we're not willing to say, okay, God, this is where you want me to be. This is what you want me to do. So I'm going to be here doing this thing, and I will let you use it. The only wasted thing in our lives is whatever we don't surrender to God. The only wasted time in our lives is the time we say, God, you don't get to use this. The only wasted experience in our lives are the times that we don't hand over. Because in this time, in this place, what God wants to do is he wants to make you into the man that he's called, created, and redeemed you to be. That's the whole point of this moment. That God actually wants to make you into a certain kind of man. Now, he doesn't just want to have you be the kind of man who does a bunch of things, like a bunch of checklists, like what does a Catholic man look like? What does a Catholic man do? What I want to talk about this morning is what is that? What does a Catholic man actually look like? And again, not just what they do, like a checklist. If you start doing these things, you'll be a Catholic man. I mean, what kind of man does God have in mind when he has you in mind? That he created you for a reason. That he redeemed you in his son for a reason. So what kind of man does he want you to look like? What kind of man does he want you to be? Not just what he wants you to do, but what kind. Does that make sense? So I think, but in order to kind of answer, I think, the question of like, what does a Catholic man look like? We have to answer the question, what's a man? There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of confusion. That's my brothers-in-law. They were like, talk about masculinity. Talk about misunderstanding masculinity. Talk about toxic masculinity. I'm like, okay. So you want me to talk about masculinity? I got it. Because there's so much confusion over what a man is. I mean, honestly, when I didn't even know. Like, I never anticipated that we would be living in a culture that would ask men to stop being men. No. That would tell men that it's wrong to be a man. That to say that actually to be a man is a threat to the people around you. I never thought, because I grew up with these incredible heroes who would be like the most incredible, strong, brave, antagonistic, defiant, servant men. Dr. Leonard Sass, I don't know if you know Dr. Leonard Sass, he wrote a book called Boys Adrift, and he's a psychologist, and he actually studied, here's the situation when it comes to men. In our culture, when it comes to boys in our culture. And one of the things he noticed is he said, our culture kind of funnels boys into one of two camps. One is like the culture of the slacker dude. So basically, boys, as you grow in strength, just kind of like let it dissipate. Hang out in video games. Just kind of like, dude, like whatever. Just like, I just live and let live, man. Like that's the kind of, like people in Boulder, you know? Sorry. Just kidding. I'm sorry. So sorry. but it's the idea, right? At the heart of it is I have this growing strength in me, but I just let it, I waste it. The other funnel that boys are passed into is the bully or the brute, he says. It's like take your strength and then you got to assert that thing. You got to like take that strength and you got to drive the biggest truck. You got to take that strength and you got to do, kind of like shove that around, like push your weight around. And he says, neither of these views of man, the slacker dude or the brute, the slacker dude or the bully, are actually authentic masculinity. Because they're both a misuse of strength. See, one of the gifts that God has given to every man, I don't care how big or how small you are, I don't care how physically imposing or physically unimposing a man is, that God has made every man in some way to use his strength. So the one chooses to let their strength dissipate. The other chooses to exert his strength to dominate. But Dr. Leonard Sass, from a Christian perspective, says there is actually an alternative. The vision that God has is this. The vision that God has is to use your strength to serve. To harness your strength and actually put it at the service of others. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but I'll just give it away. Jesus at one point, he only, in the scriptures, in the Gospels, Jesus only describes himself once. When he describes himself, he uses two different words. He says, I am gentle. He says, I'm meek and humble of heart. Meek and humble of heart. He also describes himself as the gate and the bread of life and the shepherd. Yeah, but like when he uses like adjectives, it's meek and humble of heart. So when we hear sometimes as men, okay, Jesus says he's meek, we're like, okay. Because we imagine this, you have this image of Jesus in our minds that kind of this like, kind of, from the 60s, kind of hippie guy, just, hello, I'm Jesus, peace. Kind of like, here's a flower. Like that's the image sometimes we get into our head of Jesus being meek. But it was fascinating. I heard recently the translation of the word meek is not weak. In fact, the translation of the word meek is the opposite of weak. So It's used in this context. So if you took a stallion, like this horse that has so much power, but it's power uncontrolled, that if you would meek the horse, it was now power brought under control. That's what it is to meek someone. That's what it is to become meek. It's not to become weak. It's not to become easily dominated, but it's to say, like, I've all this power, all this strength, all this intelligence, all these gifts. What I've done is I've brought them under control. So when Jesus says, I am meek, he is definitely not saying, I've given away all my strength. What he's saying is, all my strength has been brought under control. So he's not a dissipated slacker dude, and he's not this bully. He's someone who says, I've come with all this strength, all this power. It's meeked, and I came to serve, not to be served. So that's this image, this picture. This is what a man looks like. So here's the question then. Okay, if that's what a man looks like, a man is like power under control. Dr. Leonard Sass, not dissipated, not dominated, but at the service of others. When do we know, in our culture, when do you know that you're a man? I mean, that's just crazy because other cultures, right, they have signs. They have clear, like, you pass through this rite of passage, and usually it's really difficult, and not everyone actually passes through the rite of passage. There's a challenge. So when, in our culture, do we know that we're men? It's like, is it, got my driver's license? Like, we know that is not the case. I'm 18, now I can vote. Like, also no. I can buy cigarettes. Clearly, no. Like, I'm 21 now, I can drink. That's not... I went to college, got a job. You know, sometimes our students say, it's when you get a big boy job. I'm like, listen, even the way you're describing that is still a big boy job. Like, it's clearly, when do we in our culture know that you're a man? And I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think that it's not an external thing. We don't have any external signs about this. I think it has to be something internal. We know we're men when we've made a decision, and that decision, I would say, is to take responsibility. That we know that we've left the world of the boy, and we become the man when we just say, no, the first step is I've learned to take responsibility for myself. Of course, the next step is I've decided to take responsibility for those around me. Because think about it, like when you're a kid, when you're a boy growing up, it's like you just do what you're told. Yeah, what do I need to do? I'll do that thing. When do I need to eat? Okay, I'll eat now. When do I need to go to bed? Okay, do that. I talked to so many husbands who, when they say, when my wife is out of town, like she was out of town for the weekend, and I slept on the couch, and I just ate pizza for supper, and then for breakfast, and then for lunch. And I just stayed up, and like, when she's not around, I don't know when to go to bed, I don't know what to eat. There's that sense of like, wait a second, but a man doesn't just do what they're told. The man takes responsibility for himself. And it's so interesting. I don't know if you've ever had this experience where, so I would say the besetting sin or besetting temptation for every man is passivity. And the besetting temptation for every woman is control. So imagine, like, here's this marriage relationship where if our besetting temptation is to like passivity, like, I mean, think about, if you're married, think about how the wedding got planned. Like, honey, yeah, whatever you want. Whatever you want. She can do whatever she wants. And she's so happy because she gets to do whatever she wants. And like, yep, she's planning the whole thing. And it's all good. And honey, yeah, absolutely. Whatever you want. Passive. And she's like, I'll do it all the way I want. Control. And even in that wedding preparation, what happens a lot of times is she gets upset. At one point, she's like, why aren't you more participating in this whole thing? You're like, because it's your thing. I just want to help you. It means I want to be passive. Now, a lot of times, men will take that and women will take that into their marriage. And at first, it's great. She gets what she wants, whatever you want. However you want the house to look, that's how it looks. And I get what I want. I just, passive. And it is a match made in heaven. Until it becomes hell. And then she starts saying, why aren't you making more decisions in our relationship? Why aren't you making more decisions in our family? Why aren't you leading our family? And you're like, why can't I make a decision? You take so much control. And all of a sudden we begin to resent each other, where she resents the fact that he's not more active, and he resents the fact that he doesn't have as much influence, and she always takes control. And all of a sudden we realize, wait a second, but to be a man would be to say, I'm going to reject that passivity. I'm going to embrace responsibility. That's one of these markers of a man. I would say the first mark of a true man is I've rejected passivity, I embrace responsibility. That's why I think like when you think about, if you ever watched Band of Brothers, you ever watched any of those movies about the men of World War II, like I work on a college campus, and so my students are 17 to 24 years old. Sometimes I just look at these men and I think, I wonder, if they were called upon to serve, like my grandfather was called upon to serve, would they be able to rise up to that place? Like, what made those men special? And I don't know if it was like they're raised differently. I don't know if it was like it was just a different situation. But I think it's this. I think it was they were willing to take responsibility. They were called upon out of themselves and said, okay, I will put my life on hold. I will put my life on the line for the sake of someone else. The mark of manhood is I'm willing to take responsibility, not just for myself. I'm willing to take responsibility for someone else. But we keep running up against this temptation, right? Of this temptation towards passivity. Or even this temptation that we talked about at the very beginning of this whole thing, which is, but I'd just rather be somewhere else. I'd just rather be doing something else. There's actually a technical word for that desire to be somewhere else doing something else. There's like a church word for it. It's called acedia. Another way to say it is sloth. Some people say sloth, but I just think of like the three-toed thing. So sloth or acedia is the word for this. It's the desire. Some people think that sloth is being lazy. It's not being lazy. Sloth or acedia is the desire to be somewhere else doing something else. The desire to escape my responsibility. The desert monks, they called it the Noonday Devil because how they described it was you're in your little hut in the desert. And it's from 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock, you just have to sit there and pray. And that's what you're supposed to be doing. That's where you're supposed to be doing what you're supposed to be doing. That's what you're supposed to be doing. But they said that, while there are all these sins that a person could be tempted to fall into, the one that is universal, like all the other ones are kind of individual to us. You don't have to be tempted to all of them. The one that tempts every human being is this acedia, this desire in the noon of the day to be somewhere else doing something else. And think about that. That might not be your weekly experience, but that is definitely our experience in life. Every man experiences it. Sometimes as a result of it, they buy a new fancy car. Sometimes as a result of it, they start working out. And sometimes as a result of it, they leave their wives and they leave their children. It's essentially a midlife crisis. And every man faces it at some point. This desire, think about this. When I started this work, when I started this job, I started this family, started this relationship, everything was new. And it was like everything was exciting, everything was growing, and it was great potential. Now it's just kind of like showing up for work. Not a lot of promotions these days. Kids are just growing day by day, and life is still the wife, and retirement's really a long ways away. And right here I am, between 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, just like as life just like, I guess I'll just keep showing up. I have so many responsibilities. I want to run. I'd rather be somewhere else doing something else. But I can't. I can't leave. That's the worst part, right? Isn't it? The worst part is like, no, you can't even choose. You have to stay. It's like not eating meat on Fridays or having to fast during Lent, where it's like, if you went a day without meat, normally you'd be like, okay, fine, whatever. But if someone tells you, no, today you can't have meat, it's like, I want meat so much. It's not because you want meat more that day. It's because like, well, someone else is telling me I can't have it. But I want an Oopa Loopa now, Daddy. And because I can't leave, I want to leave even more. And because I have all these responsibilities and these people are counting on me, even more, it grates on me. Now, this happens to every human being. This happens to every man in particular. And I'm just inviting you, brothers, when that happens, because it's going to happen if not right now, if it hasn't happened yet, when that happens, embrace it. When that happens, engage with it. When that happens, you have to stay. Because not only is your family counting on you, not only is your parish counting on you, not only is the society, like your soul is riding on this. Your soul is riding on your willingness to when that gets to that point and you want to bolt because it's just so overwhelming. That's when you absolutely need to engage. and not be lulled to sleep. But so many of us are lulled to sleep, particularly in that noonday time. St. Peter wrote about this. He, in 1 Peter chapter 5, at the end of his letter, St. Peter says this. He says, "Be sober and vigilant. Your opponent, the devil, is prowling around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Resist him, steadfast in faith, knowing that your fellow believers, your brothers, throughout the world undergo the same suffering." Like, this is not unusual. This is not unusual to you. That desire to escape responsibility is not unusual to you. St. Peter says, remain sober and vigilant, steadfast in your faith, knowing your brothers around the world are experiencing the same thing. But there is an enemy who prowls about like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. We know we have an enemy. And if he can take out, see, you guys, he has already destroyed so many of our brothers. He has lulled them to sleep. He's made them ineffective. Actually, it's interesting. I watched a documentary on lions because why not? And I've got a lot of time. My job is really easy. And I work 1 day a week. And so it was about like how lions interact in their pride. And there's like, there's the alpha lion, whatever. And at one point, typically, or many points, as young male lions come up, they want to challenge the alpha for dominance of the pride. And it's really fascinating how they do this. One of the things they showed is that they typically the young lions come up to the old lion, and they don't like out and out attack him. They kind of walk up next to him and kind of like give him a shoulder, which is like if you've ever been in a bar in that hat, the guy walks by and just doof, and like, oh, okay. He doesn't like throw down his drink and like start swinging. It's always this kind of like, little shoulder thing. Like, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? When someone gives you that shoulder, you have a decision. What are you gonna do? You're gonna back down from this fight, or are you gonna step up to this fight? We know that there's the temptation, or the response we always have, to stress, to attack, is fight or flight, right? It's naturally inborn to us as human beings, and all animals, fight or flight. When there's this there's an aggression, there's an attack, there's a battle coming, fight or flight. Someone pointed out to me recently, they said, but for so many men these days, it's not fight or flight. There's a third option, freeze. And too many men, rather than saying, okay, hey, I need to get out of here. This is overwhelming. This is too much, actually. I need to run. That's actually, fight another day. Or to engage and say, let's do battle. We have to do that. We can't escape this. There's that third option that too many men are choosing, which is just like, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to freeze. When it was your job to fight. Or when it was your job to take your family and say, no, this is not where they belong. I'm going to run with them. That first little shoulder from the lion, it's subtle, but it's clear what's happening. What are you going to do? Are you going to fight? Or are you going to flee? Or are you going to freeze? When the older male engages and they actually fight, this is the thing that destroyed me. I was like, wow, this is incredible. When the older male engages and they actually battle each other. One of the things that they pointed out, the commentator was pointing out, said, notice that they don't go for each other's faces. They don't go after each other's throats. They don't go for the jugular. What they do is they go for each other's genitals. You're like, ouch. Yes, but more than that. You're like, oh, one of those kind of fighters. Yeah, I don't like those kind. Why would they do that? Because they know, if I can render him emasculated, he is no longer a threat. If I can take him out at the genitals, I don't have to kill him. I don't have to destroy him. All I have to do is render him, I have to take away his masculinity. I have to take away what makes him a man, and then I'm in charge. I don't have to dominate. I don't have to destroy. All I have to do is emasculate. And now he's no longer a threat. How many ways have us modern men, allowed the evil one to emasculate us, to render us ineffective because, well, What are the ways I've allowed Satan to castrate me? What are the ways I've allowed the evil one to take away the power that God gave to me? That first mark of that Catholic man is the responsibility. I'm willing to fight. I'm willing to choose heroism. I'm willing to actually do what I said I was going to do. First mark. The second mark, though, is a Catholic man has to be competent. Not just have responsibility, we have to be men of competency. Like, to actually be it's one thing to take responsibility, but we have to be men of excellence as well. We have to be men who actually train ourselves. Now, whether that be like in your job, your profession, like I'm an excellent teacher, like I have competency in that, or I'm an excellent lawyer, or I'm an excellent plumber. I work for the city, and I take care of making sure everything works well. When it comes to sanitation, when it comes to like that lawn, I did that. I'm competent at my job. But there's something even more that's more important. Is this willingness to be a man of freedom and a man of power. Basically, am I competent when it comes to the life that God has called me to live? How do we become competent Catholic men? The answer is through training. We are trained to be competent. No one's born competent. So we can embrace responsibility, but the next thing is I have to train myself to be competent. Now, there's another church word. We already talked about the one church word that was acedia. Another one is similar to it. It's the word asceticism. Have you ever heard of asceticism or ascesis? So it's like, so Lent is a season of asceticism, right? So it's a season of penance. But sometimes we think of that penance or that asceticism as just like, well, for this Lent, I'm not going to have cream in my coffee. You're like, oh, wow, heroic, But ascesis is actually a Greek word that means training. It doesn't just mean like I'm going to skip the sweets. Ascesis means I'm going to be trained. Imagine if all the men in this room went into Lent, a season of asceticism, saying, okay, for the next 40 plus days, this is not a season of just me denying something. This is a season of me training, become competent, to be able to be the kind of man who can do what I said I was going to do. Responsibility is, again, knowing what you're going to do and embracing that. Then competency is, I actually have the ability to do what I said I was going to do. I have the ability to lead my family in the way that they need to be led. I have the ability to serve my family in the way they need to be served. I have the ability to pray. When I said I was going to pray, I actually show up and pray. Oh, man, I really want to read the Bible. As long as that stays like a nice little hope, nice little idea, it's a nice little hope. It's a nice little idea. It makes no difference. But if we're willing to train ourselves, in fact, St. Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Paul says this. He says, do you not know that all the runners in the stadium run the race, but only one wins the prize? So men run so as to win. You don't want to be like an also-ran. Coming out this morning, I'm out here for the fun run. Like, no. St. Paul says, listen, I'm running for charity. No, you're running for your life. You're running for the Lord. Run so as to win. Goes on. Every athlete exercises discipline, ascesis, in every way. They do it to win a perishable crown. We do it to win an imperishable one. And says, so therefore, I do not run aimlessly. I do not fight as if I were shadowboxing. Like, this isn't a game for me. I'm not seeing like, how long can I go without sweets? How long can I go without watching Netflix? How long can I go without beer this year? I'm saying I'm running. He says, I drive my body and I train it, for I fear that after having preached to others, I myself should be disqualified. How tragic would it be, brothers, to know the truth about Jesus Christ, but because I just wasn't willing to be trained, because I wasn't willing to strive after competence, that I actually got disqualified in the race. I was willing to take responsibility for myself, but I wasn't actually willing to take up the challenge. And this is true no matter how old or how young we are, right? My older brothers, you're still in the fight. Like, that life is still competence, life is still excellence, life is still striving after that asceticism, life is still training. Like, it's not like, oh, that was for the younger days. I mean, I know, because there's so many older men I know who are striving after the Lord. They're like, no, this is my season to race. This is my season. Like, I might have started, I don't know how I started. I don't know how you started. You might have started rough. You might have started really rough. You might have started out great, but in so many ways, it's not just how you start, it is how you finish. My older brothers, you know that your life, at this point in your life, has to be one of ascesis. It has to be one of constantly training. Your race is not over. And also, my young brothers, I'm so glad you're here as young people, because you're never too old to start, and you're never too young to start. Like really training for life. And that's why one of my favorites, one of my favorites, one of my 15-year-old girl. So, like totally, you guys, it's like so good. Okay, David is like my favorite ever. David is one of my favorite characters in the entire Bible. And you know the story how David comes on the scene, right? There's King Saul and the armies of Israel, and they're facing the Philistines. And there's this one military soldier from the Philistines whose name is Goliath, and he comes out and challenges everyone. Rather than have both armies come together, you send out your best soldier, and I'll fight them. Whoever wins gets to win the whole thing. Now, weeks go by, and no one volunteers until what happens? David, who's a shepherd boy, shows up to bring his brothers food, and he says, "What's going on over there?" And his brothers are like, they give him the lowdown, and he's like, "Well, I'll do it." I love how Scripture describes this moment, because David comes to Saul, and Saul says, and I love it too, because at one point, the brothers get mad at David. He's like, "Well, I'll do it." And the brother's like, "Well, shut up. You're such a stupid punk. You're the youngest one." And David says this. He says, what have I done now? I was only talking. I'm like, yeah, I was the younger brother too, David. I know that feeling. But the words David said got to Saul. This is 1 Samuel chapter 17. So then David spoke to Saul, "Let your majesty not lose courage. I'm at your service to go and fight this Philistine." Which I just think is hilarious. Like, imagine this scene. Here's Saul, the king. Like, no one in your army is going out, including yourself, by the way. No one in your army is going, because Saul is described as being a head and shoulders above everyone else. Like, he was king because he's like a good soldier. He's like, "Oh, someone else. Here comes this boy." Imagine here's David coming out and saying, like, "Saul, King Saul, don't worry, I'm here." Let your majesty not lose heart. I'll go fight him. And here's what Saul says. Saul says, "You cannot go up against this Philistine and fight with him because you're only a youth. He's been a warrior since his youth. You don't have what it takes. You're not competent." David knows something. His whole youth has been spent in training. And here's how he responds. He says, "Your servant, I used to tend my father's sheep. And whenever a lion or a bear came to carry off a sheep from the flock, I would go after it, and I would attack it, and I would rescue its prey from its mouth." This is how David spent his summers, right? This is not like I played some Xbox. Like, you guys, I've totally played Call of Duty. I'm like a soldier, basically. This is not what David said. He's like, "Okay, here's the choice. I could be the slacker due to this." And he's like, no, I trained myself. I would go after it. If it attacked my father's sheep, I would chase it down and attack it. He goes on, he says, "If it attacked me, I would seize it by the jaw, strike it, and kill it. Your servant has killed both a lion and a bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them because he has insulted the armies of the living God." That's why I love David, you guys, because he didn't wait. He didn't ask permission. You guys, he took responsibility, and he was able to take responsibility in that moment because he had been training himself his entire life for this moment. To be able, when he was needed, to be able to serve. When he was called upon, he wasn't even called upon. He volunteered. He didn't say, "Tell me what to do." He's like, "That needs to be done. I can do it." How can you do it? I've been training for this my whole life. How do we train? Are we training ourselves? Like, what's the role of training asceticism in my life, in your lives? It could be anything, but here's a freebie. Here's a free one. One of my favorite saints, Saint Jose Maria Escrivá, if you know who he is, founder of Opus Dei, just incredible guy. This training, he really embraced it, right, as penance and as this, like, let's move forward. He suggested something that a lot of my college students really resonate with. He calls it the heroic minute. What St. Jose Maria Escrivá describes as the heroic minute is this: the moment your alarm goes off, you get up and get out of bed. Like that's it. That's the heroic minute. Because a lot of times when we think of like asceticism, we think at training like it's fasting or it's whatever, and like, well, I can't fast too much because I need my strength to do my job, or like I can't, give up this because I don't want to harm my body. Saint Josemaria says this. He says that it never hurt anyone to get up on time. Now, there's no lasting damage, at least, right? Saint Josemaria, the patron saint against snooze buttons, because he's saying like, what happened in that whole snooze button thing, heroic minute, the reason why it's heroic is because I know some of you are like, son, I haven't used a snooze button a day in my life. That's because you have embraced training. You've embraced responsibility. What I mean by that is you know when it's time to get up. That's the first part of like the heroic minute, is you've decided. A lot of times, our students at least, and maybe all of us men in here, sometimes when we know we go to bed the next night before, we haven't decided exactly when to get up or why we're getting up. So like, maybe I'll get up early tomorrow. If I wake up early, maybe I'll work out. No, you won't. If you haven't decided, maybe I'll get up tomorrow and pray a little extra. No, you're not going to do that unless you decide, this is when I'm going to get up because I'm going to do this thing. So I need to embrace responsibility. What do I need to do tomorrow? What is the call of tomorrow morning? And I decide the night before, this is the time. That means then, in the moment, when the alarm goes off, that's what they call the moment of choice. I've decided the night before, and then the next day, I need to have this other thing, this third thing, and it's called integrity in the moment of choice. That's the third mark of the Catholic man. Not only rejects passivity, embraces responsibility, not only strives after competency through ascesis and asceticism and training, but also integrity in the moment of choice. Because competence is the ability to do what I said I was going to do. I have the ability to do what I said I was going to. I have the ability to do what I'm supposed to do in this moment. That's competence. I've been trained to do this. But integrity is actually doing what you said you were going to do the moment you need to do it. Competence is being able to do this. Integrity is actually doing the thing you need to do when you need to do it. And this is the great thing, you guys. Everyone who's been baptized in this room, I don't know if everyone's been baptized, but if you've been baptized in this room, you've been anointed. Like the Holy Spirit has come upon you and you're anointed. You know Jesus Christ. Christ isn't his last name. You know that already, right? That's not Christ means the anointed one. And when you were baptized, the bishop or priest or deacon, whoever it was, anointed you with chrism. That chrism, most of the right, Christ chrism. So you're anointed, which means you're all little like Christitos, just anointed ones walking around, consecrated for the Lord, which means you've been consecrated for a purpose. Anointed by the Holy Spirit for a purpose, which is one of the reasons why we absolutely need to embrace that responsibility. It's been given to you. To be trained to be able to do what we need to do, but then have the integrity in the moment, because so often we're tempted to not live on purpose. So often we're tempted to not live on mission. I know a lot of you men know what it is to be on mission, but all of us men know what it's like to live off mission. So many of you know what it's like to live on mission. I know I get up in the morning. I know I continue to love my wife. I know I continue to love my children. I know I continue to serve my country. I know I continue to go to my job. I know what it's like to live on mission, but every one of us knows what it's like to live what you might call a shadow mission. And my hero, a couple chapters later, David, you can see him live a shadow mission. Here's David, the anointed one. David's the king. He's anointed the king from his youth. Even before this moment with Goliath, David's already been anointed. He's already been chosen, put on mission. And the mission was not just to fight Goliath. The mission was not just to unite the kingdom. The mission was to be the king. What happens is in 2 Samuel chapter 11, there's this new story that's told about David. The new story goes like this. David, with a mission, says this, the first line. At the turn of the year, when kings go out on campaign, David sent out Joab along with the officers and armies of Israel while he remained in Jerusalem. Now, here's something you probably already know about kings in the first century, the kings in the ancient world. Sometimes I imagine kings like, okay, they sit on the big throne, big crown, people have the palm fronds and kind of cool them off, like, more grapes, please. That's not what the role of the king was. The role of the king was not to be served. The role of the king was to fight for his people. That's why you were the king, because you were supposed to fight. That's your main job. So the first line in 2 Samuel chapter 11 says, when usually kings go out to fight, David sent out someone else to fight while he remained back in Jerusalem. This is like red flag number one. Because that's the thing is like none of us like, very few of us skydive off of the cliff immediately. Usually there's that first drift. This is David's first drift. The next line. David, however, remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David rose from his siesta and strolled about the roof of the palace. Okay, not only did he not like, you guys, you go out to fight. I've got a lot of work to do back here at the office. Like, we've got business meetings, we've got some finance planning, we got to build a new wall. He's rising from his siesta, right? So David not only is not living on mission, going out and fighting, he's also indulging his senses, right? He's just kind of like, I'm just kind of hanging out, seeing what's on Netflix, drinking the one extra beer a night. Close to home, anyone? Okay, moving forward. You don't have, not show of hands. Strolled around the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing who was very beautiful. Now, this is that moment where, again, living on mission, David would be like, whoops. Ceiling scene. When I was growing up, if we were watching TV, watching a movie with my parents, there was something inappropriate on the screen. My mom or dad would say, ceiling scene. They'll look at the ceiling. Okay, you can look now. Okay, fine. So David, seeing Bathsheba, he could say like, oh, whoops, okay, ceiling scene. But what does he do? He says, David had inquiries made about the woman. So this is red flag number 3, who was told, oh, she's Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. And the next line is, David then sent for her. He went from being hero, started drifting. I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I want to be somewhere else I want to be somewhere else doing something else. I'm the king, so I can. When it's time to like discipline myself, I'm not going to discipline myself. Now I want that, so I'm going to go take it. Found out she was married, and then David sent for her and took her. When she came to him, he had relations with her, and then returned her to her house. Can you imagine? Here's a man who had so much responsibility, so much competence, so much integrity, and in this moment, he finds out this woman is someone else's wife, takes her, and then just sends her home. You know, in our culture, we have those stories that have come up again and again and again of men who have just done that, lived the shadow mission. I can, so I'm going to take her and then just give her a part in the movie. And this is the hero. Now, as the story unfolds, it turns out Bathsheba gets word back to him and says, okay, I'm pregnant now. So what happens is David's like, shoot, I need to cover my tracks. So what he does, he calls Uriah back from the front and says, Uriah, come eat with me. Tell me about what's going on in the battlefield. Uriah shows up, and King David gets him drunk and sends him back home. But Uriah doesn't go home. Uriah goes down and he sleeps with the other soldiers because he's like, and David's like, why didn't you go back to your wife? And he says, well, no, I'm on mission right now, King. I'm so sorry. I'm on mission. My brothers are out in the field. I can't go sleep with my wife when my brothers are out in the field. Here is the picture, the dichotomy between the man living a shadow mission, David, and Uriah, who's living on mission. So David's like, that doesn't, come back here again. I'll give you even more alcohol, get him a little frisky. And like, go back to your wife with some food. And he says, no, I can't. I'm on mission. So what does David do? David, the hero, the anointed one, the one who has this incredible mission. He gives Uriah a note to take back to Joab, who's leading the army, and says, put Uriah at the head of the fight, and then when the fighting gets fiercest, draw back and let Uriah be struck down. David goes from being hero, a man of responsibility, a man of competence, a man of integrity, to an adulterer and a murderer. And it didn't start with him saying, I'm going to commit adultery, I'm going to murder. It started with him saying, I want to be somewhere else. I want to be doing something else. And he just decided to live a shadow mission. There's good news. The reason David's still a hero is because he was sliding, right? I don't know if you guys know what it's like to slide out of your mission. Slide out of caring for your wife. Slide out of pursuing and just even honoring the women around you. The young men here, you don't have wives yet, I'm guessing? No? But to honor your sisters, to slide out of that. You know, the great news is God had mercy on David, and he stopped the break. He stopped the slide. But in order to stop the slide, he had to break the man. He did it, but too many of us decide we're just going to keep living that shadow mission. Remember when I first heard that term shadow mission, I was reading this book, and there was a men's retreat, kind of like this, but multiple days, and they were talking shadow mission. At one night at the retreat, they were all sitting around a campfire and just kind of sharing stuff, and things got quiet, and this one man, who you could see was visibly disturbed, and he started poking the fire, and he's like, you know, I got to tell you guys my shadow mission. He said, my shadow mission is when my wife and my kids go to bed, I get out of bed and I go down to the family computer and I engage in destructive behavior while the rest of the world can go to hell. And the guys kind of chuckled like, too much information. And he's like, no, you have to hear this. When my wife and my children are in bed, I go to our family computer and I engage in destructive behavior while the rest of the world can go to hell. He's like, I'm on a slide, and I don't want to slide off. I want to be that man of integrity, not only who can do what he needs to do, but who actually does what he needs to do when he needs to do it. I was working with some of our men on campus, and I asked them, I said, when do you think you're going to know you're a man? And one of them, his name's Peter. Peter said, when I have a hold on my sexuality in such a way that I never want to use another person in the wrong way. He said, when I have a hold on my sexuality in such a way, I never want to use a woman in the wrong way. He says, that's when I know I'm no longer a boy. I'll have sexual thoughts, I have sexual emotions and desires, but I know I'm a man when I'm in control of those emotions. Another man, his name is Eric. Eric said, when I can interact with another and not ask what they can do for me, but ask, how can I serve them? That's when I know that's when I'm gonna know I'm a man. I can interact with someone, regardless of who they are, and not ask the question, what can they do for me, but ask the question, what can I do for them? I was listening to both those answers. I was like, you guys, what I hear you saying is, you're gonna know you're a man when you're no longer selfish. When it's no longer me first. Like basically, the way to say it as Christians is, you know you're a man when you know how to love. Like when you know how to love well. And then when I say love, I don't mean like, that Valentine's Day, like the gushy, whatever. I mean like active love. Like to love in such a way that you look differently. Then I'm going to say that again. To love in such a way that you look differently. That's fourth mark of a Catholic man, is a man who actually knows how to love in such a way that you actually end up looking differently. And that's crazy because I think a lot of us don't want to look different. Like, in fact, I think a lot of us would settle, maybe not everyone here, but I think a lot of us would settle for like being a decent guy. And a lot of us would settle for people to say, oh yeah, no, he's a good guy. He's a good guy. I like that guy. He's a good guy. Instead of being so much like Jesus that we look different. Because that's what the love would do. To look so much like Jesus that you'd actually end up looking different. And I remember getting an email from a mom whose son had gone to a Catholic college, he was in college, not our college, but a Catholic college conference. And he came back and he was changed. Now, this mom, she described this whole thing. She's like, we sent our son to Catholic elementary school. We sent him to Catholic high school. Like, we paid a lot of money. We sent him to this college because he wanted to go there because it had a great Newman Center, like a great Catholic presence on campus. And then he went to this conference and he came back and now he's going to daily mass. Now he's praying every day. He's doing a rosary or something. Now he's talking about living in a house with a bunch of other Catholic men next year, looking at a lease. And I just found out that last weekend he went on a seminary visit. He didn't even tell me till he got back home. Like, what is going on at that conference? Like, what's wrong with him? And I was like, okay. I was reading this email. I probably wrote 12 drafts back to her. Because I was like, oh, calm down, delete. Like, don't, just shh. She's just a mom. She loves her son. Just, I was so like, are you kidding me? Like you and your husband spent thousands of dollars sending your child to Catholic school. You're encouraging him to go to the Newman Center and go to mass on Sundays, but ultimately you just want him to be a nice guy. The reason you sent him off to Catholic school was because you wanted to be a good kid who pays his taxes and doesn't end up in jail someday. And the moment that like actually taking his faith and like running with it is you're like, whoa, what's going on here? This is crazy. This is strange. I don't want him to be weird. I just want him to be good. So I wrote back to her and I wrote this like, I wrote those things to her and then hit send. Then immediately wrote like, I'm sorry if that I apologize. If it's too offensive because sometimes I like people liking me. And so the problem is not your son. The problem is you. No, to her credit, she heard it, received it. She's like, yeah, I think you're right. The problem is that I was talking to other moms, and they're all talking about how their sons and daughters are living like the college life. And here's my son who's not living the college life. And I was like, I don't want him to be so weird that he sticks out. I don't want him to be so weird that he looks different. And I was just afraid for myself and how they would think of him. But the goal of the Catholic man is not to fit in or be a good boy. It's we have to look different, which means that love in some ways has to be defiant. Like our lives have to be marked by this defiance. That we have to decide, I'm not going to live like everyone else. I'm not going to look like everyone else. My responsibility, a lot of responsible men, super good to have them. A lot of competent men. Awesome. Fewer men with integrity, but even fewer men who want to love like Jesus. Because if you're going to love like Jesus, it's going to absolutely look different. This is the last thing. I know that out here you guys have probably talked about, in the last couple of years, I think, our faith has come under fire in a lot of ways. And there's been a number of threats, even from our own country, our own government. I love our country so much. Best country, I really, truly believe best country in the world. But there's a lot of threats that have come that it seems like the next thing that's going to be taken away or become under threat is religious liberty. Like religious freedom. I think that's probably the next thing that's going to come under threat, under attack. It already has, obviously. It might even be the next thing that's taken away is religious liberty. And I was reflecting on this and thinking like, that's a problem. But then I was thinking, actually, for most of us, it's not a problem. What I mean by that is, in the lives of most Catholic men, the established government could take away religious freedom and it wouldn't change our lives at all. You'd still be able to go to Mass. More or less, you'd still be able to send your kids to like religious ed, drop them off like we do. Slow down the caravan, open the door, get out. Pick you up in an hour. For the most part, if the government took away religious freedom, it would not affect our daily lives at all because we don't live our daily lives as Catholic men outside the walls of the church. Like we don't actually fight to belong to him. But to be a man of responsibility and integrity and competence, who love, it means we have to fight. Even in this country that's so good, we're going to have to become men who fight. I'm going to close with this story. I've shared it before, but it's just so powerful, and a couple of years ago, number of years ago, a friend of mine told me about a man from China who he lived in the Fujian province of China. And there, it's still illegal to be Catholic, like really Catholic. They have the Chinese church, but it's not legit, So the real Catholic church is still persecuted. And so they have to, in order to have Mass, they have to have these clandestine Masses in the middle of the night in people's homes. So this man, actually, his priest came to their home in the middle of the night. They had Mass. They have to have sentries outside the home to keep watch for the authorities. And this night, as they're packing up from Mass, the sentry came in and said, yep, the authorities are on the way. And so everyone scrammed. Everyone left. And the guy had to stay there, though, because it was his house. So the authorities came in, and they could see that Mass had just been celebrated, and here's the one guy who's here. So they took him into custody. And for the next 3 to 4 weeks, they interrogated him. They tortured him. They stripped him naked and chained him to a wall, and they starved him, and they beat him, and they burned him. They took a cattle prod and they jerry-rigged the cattle prod so it was up to 1,000,000 volts of electricity going through this thing. They just touched different parts of his body and just asked him this one question. The question is, where's the priest? That's all we want to know. All we need to know is where's the priest? You get to go home. All you need to know, just tell us where the priest is, and you get to go back to your family. All you need to tell us is where but he knew this. He knew that if I tell them where the priest is, my family won't have the Eucharist for who knows how long. And all my neighbors, they won't have the Eucharist. I don't know how long. We don't know how many years it'll take for another priest to come to our region and be able to bring us the Eucharist. And I will not deny my family the Eucharist. I will not deny myself. I will not deny my neighbors the Eucharist. So after 3-4 weeks of this constant torture, the authorities were like, we can't break him. I mean, it's crazy to even just imagine that actually was the conclusion they had. So we can't break this man. And so they sent him back home. Just imagine the heroism. Like, this is a man, responsibility and competence and integrity and this defiant love. It's incredible. He outlasted their torture. He's alive now. He's a hero for the Eucharist. So what happened was immediately after this, well, not too immediately, but shortly after this, he moved to the United States. And he lives in one of the northeastern states. And at first, man, he was so glad. He and his family rejoiced to be able to be. He said, we'd be able to walk down the sidewalk in the broad daylight and walk into the Catholic Church to go to Mass anytime we wanted to. No one would stop us. So he took his family into daily Mass. Just this rejoicing in this religious liberty that he had. He also realized that in the greatest country in the world, if you work hard, you make more money. So he started working longer and longer hours. Took on more and more jobs. I want to give my kids what I didn't have back in China. So pretty soon he was like, okay, wife, you take the kids to daily Mass. I can't go because I've got to work. After a little bit, he started, you get overtime on weekends, so I'm going to skip the occasional Sunday Mass. After a couple years of that, he started only going to Mass Christmas and Easter. And when my friend told me about this, he said, pray for this man, because this last Easter, he didn't even go to Mass. Now think about this. This man is a hero for the Eucharist. This man, like, literally, he's done more out of love for Jesus in the Eucharist than any one of us, all of us combined. And now he doesn't even go to Mass. And my friend said this. He said, just don't miss this point. What communist China couldn't do, what torture couldn't do, what starvation couldn't do, what being burned couldn't do, what cattle prods couldn't do, our culture was able to do, and it didn't even have to try. Those other things, they could not take this man away from the Eucharist. They couldn't take him away from Jesus. But what our culture was able to do is take him away from both the Eucharist and Jesus, and it didn't even target him. He just ended up living like the rest of us. Our culture was able to take a hero and make him mediocre. And that's what it's doing to us unless we're willing to be these kind of men. The kind of men who say, I'm willing to fight. I'm here right now. That's where I'm going to be, right here, right now. I'm going to embrace responsibility. I'm going to enter into training and ascesis so I can become competent. I'm going to become that man of integrity in the moment of choice, and I will love so thoroughly. I will look different, but I will love defiantly. Because that's what our world needs. If we're going to set the world on fire, that's the kind of men every one of us men need to become. All glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. In the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.